On today's episode, I'll be talking about the Rankin Bass claymation TV special, The Year Without a Santa Claus.
If you're looking for a man with no plans or programs, and he always needs a chance to hold hands for romance, or you're looking for the loot with an old man or cool hands, it's a creature of the night who heads for his spotlight. I'm here to welcome you to Brandon and Brandon Reviews. No method when I choose. It's Brandon and Brandon Reviews.
All right, everyone. Welcome to Brandon at Random Reviews, covering one unsystematically chosen topic at a time. If you like listening to a guy recap and review movies in weekly episodes, then look no further. To keep up with the newest content, you can find Brandon at Random Reviews on most major video and audio platforms, as well as all popular social media sites. If you enjoy this, please like and subscribe. I use listener engagement as evidence of Christmas spirit that I use to prove to Santa Claus that he shouldn't take the night off on December 24th this year. And as I mentioned, The Year Without a Santa Claus is what I'll be talking about today, based on the novel of the same name by Phyllis McGinley. This first aired on December 10th, 1974, with a runtime of 51 minutes. Produced and directed by Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass. Of course, they made the other Rankin Bass classics like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Santa Claus is Coming to Town, and Frosty the Snowman, the first two of which are claymation, and the third was a traditional animated TV movie, I believe. I think it was TV. I don't think it was like a theatrical release. It's way too short. For the writer, we have William J. Keenan, composer Maury Laws, and I guess he was the only person, Maury, I assume that's a guy, he was the only person listed as a composer or any credit for music whatsoever that I saw, so I'm hoping he's the guy that also wrote the vocals or the lyrics and everything. For the cast, we have Shirley Booth, who plays Mrs. Claus, and she also serves as the narrator. She was in a show called Hazel in the 1960s. Never seen that show. Don't really know what it's all about. I think she's like a maid or a housekeeper or something. Can't really say. She was in something called Come Back Little Sheba and The Matchmaker. I hadn't really seen or heard of Shirley Booth in any capacity other than in this role in this movie, or this special, I should say. Mickey Rooney plays Santa Claus. He also played Santa Claus in Santa Claus is Coming to Town. He was in a movie called It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, which is an older comedy. I want to say like 50s or 60s when that came out. I've seen it before. I don't really remember it. And it's funny in the era that it came out of. You know, it's not like funny by today's standards, in my opinion, but it's an alright movie and it's in color. That's the only reason I'm guessing. Probably in the 1960s sometime was when it came out. He was also in Breakfast at Tiffany's as one of the more racially insensitive characters I've ever seen. He played an Asian person who lived upstairs from Audrey Hepburn's character, and it was a caricature of an Asian person, just to put it mildly. Dick Shawn plays Snow Miser. George S. Irving rounds out the cast. He plays Heat Miser. There are other credits, but mostly people I hadn't even heard of and didn't sound like they were well known even in their time. For the plot synopsis, Santa gets sick and decides to skip his annual trip to deliver presents, and Mrs. Claus tasks two elves to find a way to convince him to change his mind about not going. Alright guys, let's just dive right into the plot of this motherfucking movie. So, this special opens with Mrs. Claus narrating and introducing the premise of The Year Without a Santa Claus. She asks if you've ever heard of this bizarre year where Santa decided to skip his super tough one-day-a-year job and just not do it. She explains that she knows all the details on Santa because she's been banging him since before your mother shat you out of her womb, I guess. I can't stress how aggressively overtold the beginning of the story is, like how much they really hammer it home. It's just there's so much that they say, but it's like how much is there really to say about the fact that Santa wakes up and feels like shit and decides to cancel Christmas, and that's it. Like that's all there is to it, but they make way more out of it because they have to fill out the short amount of time they already have. But they walk you through every nauseating detail of the story. Santa carries on about how tired he is from painting wagons red and bright, sharpening ice skates half the night, and wrapping presents in ribbons and gauze. And I've never heard somebody refer to like wrapping paper as gauze. I always think of gauze as its medical fabric-y type application, but I guess maybe that's an interchangeable term. And I guess my question regarding the whole statement about all of these things that Santa has gotten tired of doing is what the actual fuck are you talking about, Santa? You're not doing any of that shit. I saw it in the other specials. You use non-union labor to handle all of that specialty work. Mrs. Claus reassures him that she called the doctor for him and that they'll have him back up and running in no time, but that's what they refer to in psychiatry as toxic positivity because you don't know that Santa is going to get better, Mrs. Claus. You have no idea with your limited medical expertise what his prognosis might fucking be, so maybe don't give him false hope. The North Pole doctor waltzes in and carries on about how Santa never got over the pneumonia he had last year, and he makes some remark about how he's been gallivanting all over the world delivering presents to people who don't really appreciate them. And to that I say, how dare you assume my appreciation levels, sir? You don't fucking know me at all. And I don't buy that a man who works as a doctor in the North Pole is getting a good cross-section of the type of people who live on this planet and where their priorities are based on his limited exposure to them. This doctor goes on to basically say that given how many pieces of shit there are out there who don't give a fuck about Christmas, Santa might as well just stay home this year. But when Mrs. Claus points out that if he stays home, there wouldn't be a Christmas, this doctor acts like no one would really care anyway. And this might be an unpopular opinion so early on, but I feel like maybe this doctor and people like him are actually the real problem. Because, I mean, they're just kind of sitting up there on their high horse and acting like they're better than everybody. So basically, this doctor goes on his little fucking pissy rant about how no one cares about Christmas anymore and no one even believes in Santa anymore. And although Mrs. Claus tries to tell him not to listen to this stupid fuck, Santa has already fucking been duped into believing everything he's saying and just fucking eating it up. Basically, it ends up like if you've ever had an insecurity that people told you not to believe, and then all of a sudden some random person you didn't really know that well made fun of you for that very thing, and then everything just comes crashing down in your mind because it's like everything you've been told is a lie. It kind of seems like that's what Santa went through right here because he basically said that he had this inkling feeling that people were feeling that way all along, but no one had said it out loud, so he hadn't even actually said anything himself. And honestly, that's pretty fucked up. This doctor is supposedly a medical professional, and he's out here dispensing crackpot bullshit as he sees it from his small corner of the world. But he makes up his mind and tells Mrs. Claus that he is much too sick and he will have to cancel Christmas. And I don't really understand why no one could possibly fill in for this bearded fellow whose best years are probably behind him and he's clearly not in the best shape. Like, you can't tell me no one else can possibly do this if this guy can legitimately do this whole deal with delivering presents on a normal year. Why is the entire Christmas holiday contingent on the participation of a guy like this? So Santa calls an elf in the workshop and tells him that Christmas is canceled and to inform the newspapers. And I think I'm far enough in. I'm pretty sure I can just say this. There are a lot of things about this special that I don't really care for compared with other Christmas specials made by the same producers. One of which is that they force the characters to frequently speak in rhyme, especially in the first half of the movie. Another issue is the claymation is much more questionable, especially with the movement of their mouths. And I ended up actually finding some info about why that is, and I'll explain that in the trivia section. It just feels like they did something different with how they were moving these figurines, and I didn't much care for it. So I've never really gravitated toward this special. Like, I love Rudolph and I really enjoy Santa Claus is Coming to Town, but this one is I didn't even know until after I saw this that this was the one that was made like later than the two that I did like, and I wasn't surprised at all when I found out. So anyway, it cuts to this title sequence with the opening credits and this very mediocre title song that isn't particularly well written. And I'm sorry, I know I just kind of went all in on hating this movie, but I think it's honestly for the best. One thing I also find pretty bizarre is the way the narration is framed in the movie, especially early on. Like, they keep showing Mrs. Claus on screen doing the narration for no reason, and it seems like you would want to avoid that as an animator because then you have to animate her talking where she's not really relevant to the scene and she doesn't need to just be standing there, but I guess maybe it's comforting for viewers. It shows a bunch of reactions from these noteworthy figures within the North Pole community reacting to this news about Christmas being canceled. The reindeer, who are pretty fucking amped up for Christmas at this point, are extremely bummed to hear that it's canceled. The elves laboriously list the variety of things that they'll be giving up in order to forego the holiday, and of course, each successive thing they list off has to rhyme with the last thing, and it's really dumb. Luckily, we do get our occasional breaks from these really over-the-top sequences of storybook-style rhymes with every word that's spoken. It eventually cuts to a workshop with two elves in it, and the phone starts ringing. The two of them go and answer it and introduce themselves as Jingle Bells and Jangle Bells. Those are their names. And I guess they are elf names, so whatever. I will mostly be referring to them as anything but those names as much as I can, not only because their names are stupid, but because I use dictation to take notes a lot of the time, and it can't really differentiate between jingle and jangle that well when I'm talking. And these two kooky characters make it clear that Mrs. Claus is the one who is on the phone and has called them, but they are in no way revealing anything else about what she is saying as a way to masterfully build tension within the plot of the story. Jingle just keeps saying yes, Mrs. Claus, and other slight variations of that phrase over and over again before ultimately hanging up. Then it cuts to Mrs. Claus herself in the bedroom where Santa is laying on what I can only assume is his deathbed based on the advanced age that he is and his physical state. Mrs. Claus puts Santa's iconic red hat on and proclaims that it fits, and she decides to make the assertion that she could be Santa Claus, and she kicks into another awful song about being Santa Claus. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not sure Shirley Booth was actually a good singer. Maybe she was previously, like earlier in her life, but I don't think her singing voice really sounds particularly good here. She slips on the whole fucking suit in one fell swoop. Like, she jumps into the armoire and then she comes back out and she's fully dressed in this Santa suit and starts fucking dancing around the room. Then Jingle and Jangle walk up and see her from behind and excitedly exclaim that Santa must have changed his mind about skipping Christmas, but when she turns around to reveal who she is, the two elves are very put off by the sight of her in Santa's clothing, and she suggests that they'll just have to switch to plan B. But also, like, they don't really insinuate that she couldn't just take Santa's place, but I guess this movie doesn't really want to take the easy way out here. They basically just react in shock that it's her and not Santa wearing the suit, and their confusion is seemingly all she needs to talk herself out of just doing what she was thinking she was going to do, even though it is a far better option than what she actually decides to do here. She points out that the way she sees it, Santa Claus only doesn't want to do Christmas because he doesn't think anybody out there cares anymore. So she explains that her plan is to send the elves to go out somewhere and find an example to show Santa that people really do care and that there is some good in the world. Her theory is that if her husband can see this shining display of humanity, that he'll certainly change his mind and not want to cancel Christmas anymore. So for whatever reason, the elves brought this reindeer Vixen with them for this discussion. A couple of interesting facts about Vixen. I didn't realize that Vixen was supposedly one of the younger reindeer on Santa's team, and I think that also might have made me realize that Vixen might also be the only girl on the team, even though biologically speaking, female reindeer are the only ones that grow antlers, so in theory, they're actually all girls most likely. Just a little tidbit. I also feel like they kind of made her just be one of the younger reindeer. I'm sorry, Jesus. I can't believe I just said reindeers. But they made it as like a plot point to just make it a little more interesting. So when Mrs. Claus tells them not to get lost, they do freak out a little bit. Like as they're taking off, or like they're about to take off with Vixen, it's like she doesn't want them to get lost, but she also reminds them that Vixen has made the trip before and to not be worried about it. So I guess the plan here is that these two elves will both be riding on the back of this comically small reindeer, facing away from each other, like back to back. So Mrs. Claus very capably lifts the two elves one at a time onto Vixen's back. And as Vixen flies away with the two elves on her back, Mrs. Claus breaks the fourth wall, as she repeatedly does, so that she can point out that she's not sure if this is the right thing to do with sending the elves off like this on such a thin premise. But she explains that with Christmas being at risk of not happening, she figures that drastic measures are required. Even though I personally would like to think that drastic measures would also include multiple contingency plans. Of course, she has none of those, so whatever. For, if these dipshit elves happen to fuck this whole thing up with everything riding on them succeeding, like it's just like, oh yeah, like maybe have a backup plan for that. And I also want to take a moment to point out that although in Rudolph, all the reindeer are fully sentient and capable of talking amongst each other and with humans, it appears that Vixen has been demoted to a non-speaking role in this film for whatever reason, probably just because all Vixen would do is complain about having to haul these two elves the whole time, which I couldn't really fault her for. That's reasonable to complain about. When Mrs. Claus comes back in from her discussion with the elves and sends them on their way, Santa is waking up and sits up a little in bed, and he asks her what all the commotion was outside, and she says that it was just a reindeer getting a little exercise. She says that with all the rest and relaxation going on now that Christmas is canceled, everyone is jumpy as a leapfrog. And I don't think this is a real phrase, at least not one that I've ever heard anywhere in my life before, because a leapfrog, to my knowledge, which is admittedly limited, is not a type of frog, but merely a game that children play where it's like they play it where they jump over one another, like hunched over. It's a little weird. Santa tells her that they're just going to have to get used to the way things are this year because he's made up his mind about canceling Christmas. And then he proclaims that this is the life as he returns back to his resting position and he remains bedridden, feeling the effects of the sickness ravaging his mental faculties, I imagine, but whatever. Then, in a moment of hesitation and doubt, he asks Mrs. Claus if she thinks he's doing the right thing by canceling Christmas and destroying the market economy for at least an entire year, the secondary and long-term effects of which will not be fully realized for an extended period of time. And Mrs. Claus just says that no, she doesn't have an issue with this decision, even though she clearly does. And then he asks her what she's up to, and she very suspiciously drops her clothing iron on the ironing board and says, "Nothing. Do I look like I'm up to something?" Very unconvincingly. Santa explains to her that she doesn't look like she's up to something, but rather when she doesn't appear to be up to anything at all is when she's appearing to be the most like she's up to something, which sounds confusing, but actually it makes a large amount of sense if you remember that these two have been together for multiple decades. He asks her what she's really up to, and she tells him that he shouldn't really concern himself with it, and then he insists that she reveal what she's up to, and she explains that she sent the two elves down to find people on Earth who still really care about Santa and Christmas. Santa immediately freaks out and asks her if she really sent them down there alone into the cruel world by themselves. And she says no, she actually sent them with the reindeer team, or with the reindeer Vixen, I'm sorry. And Santa gets more nervous because, as I mentioned before, apparently Vixen is not very old yet. Santa explains that with the three of them, they won't likely even make it past these two men who he refers to as the Miser brothers. And Mrs. Claus mentions that she totally forgot about the fucking Miser brothers, even though it kind of seems like that's something that she probably should have thought through a little more and just maybe done a little more problem solving and critical thinking. Santa explains that if Snow Miser doesn't freeze them all, that Heat Miser will put the heat on them for sure. Santa knows he's got to act immediately to prevent the slaughter of his innocent laborers. So he calls up Dasher and rides the reindeer off into the abyss to attempt to save the three of them. Mrs. Claus explains through narration that the snow miser likes to keep things cold and the heat miser likes to keep things hot. And it's like, yeah, I think even the younger viewers might have worked that out on their own. And now, because of her, the three of them are heading right into the middle of these two brothers. Like they're having a showdown, basically. And honestly, when she says that it's because of her, I just love me an accountable queen. But yes, they are immediately having a run in with the misers. Even though meteorologically, I would say that these two brothers being this close together doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like they are just on two clouds a stone's throw away from each other, and it seems like the snow miser would perhaps be closer to the North Pole, so it would make sense that he's there, and perhaps heat miser would be closer to the equator, and naturally the southern hemisphere doesn't really matter. But allow me to briefly describe the two of them, because the design of their characters is actually pretty decent. So Snow Miser has ice for hair. It's like he has a normal male hairstyle, but it's like a block of ice instead of hair. He has pale bluish gray skin and a long hooked nose. Heat Miser has orangish hair that is styled like a trolled owl basically, but it's like shorter, and he's got like more of a traditional Caucasian complexion, and he has a red round nose. It's a little smaller than like a clown nose, but it looks a lot like one. As the elves and Vixen approach the turf of the Miser brothers, they are hit by the intersection of these two energy beams that are being projected by each brother and are shot out of the sky. And as the two elves begin to fall, it goes into an obvious commercial break moment, cliffhanger type thing, and comes back and very anticlimactically reveals that Vixen simply circled back and saved them before they fell all the way to the earth and perished. Heat Miser and his cronies laugh hysterically at their assault on the innocents, and as Vixen and the elves find their bearings, they know that they're still in pretty serious shit and could still potentially fall under further attack. But as they look down through the clouds, they see some place called Southtown, USA, which doesn't seem made up at all. I don't even know why you'd question it. The elves assert that this is a very good place where they might be able to find some Christmas spirit based on knowing virtually nothing at all about the town. As they land on the street, they are immediately pulled over by local law enforcement. The elves ask him what the fuck his problem is, and the officer tells them that he's writing them a ticket. He says that they are riding Vixen the wrong way down a one-way street. They crossed the solid white line, and they are wearing outlandish clothes on a Sunday. And honestly, based on what I've heard about obscure random laws, this all seems completely legitimate as traffic stop charges. The elves wrongly assume that maybe folks just don't take kindly to reindeer around these parts, instead of assuming the more likely power trip scenario on the part of the officer, so they opt to use their socks to cover up Vixen's antlers and ears, which isn't exactly convincing, but whatever. So they pretend that Vixen is a dog named Rover, that they're walking, and go off to search for Christmas spirit. They randomly approach a woman and ask her if she believes in Santa Claus, and she scoffs at the question and asks, "At my age?" Then, when she starts asking the elves who they are, they begin to try and answer, and she interjects and asks what the thing is that they're walking, and they say it's their dog Rover, of course, and they tell Vixen to bark for the lady because I'm sure that'll convince her. And there's something I forgot to mention because it didn't really seem relevant. I didn't think it was going to be a thing. This woman is holding what looks like an orange hand warmer, so it was just like I thought it was a weird costume choice, but whatever. But it turns out that it's actually an orange cat, and the tail and face legitimately just morph out of nowhere and appear, and suddenly the orange cat just goes apeshit about being in the presence of Vixen and chases after the reindeer that is imitating a dog. So suddenly the elves lose control of Vixen, and all 5 participants in this exchange go running away. The woman and the cat are chasing after, or whatever. It's really hard to tell who's chasing who. It cuts to Santa Claus speaking to the officer who pulled the elves over moments ago. The officer is explaining to Santa Santa that he did in fact see two questionable individuals, and when Santa tries to confirm that they didn't get into any trouble, the officer stops him and says that he better fucking believe they got into trouble, and he asserts that the judge is likely to tear them a new asshole when he sees them in court for what I assume was a minor traffic stop. Like, you either just pay the ticket. I guess they could fight it, but whatever. Santa looks over at Dasher and proclaims that he is concerned because it seems Jingle and Jangle are both about to get fucked by the long dick of the law, and it cuts to the two elves in a tree with Vixen hiding out from the old lady and the cat, and what they can do to not let Mrs. Claus down in their mission. And they realize that Santa's favorites have always been children because they're so innocent and pure and are rarely complete dicks for no reason like that old bag and her cat were. And I want to stop this recap for a moment to point out that the North Pole Doctor, based on what we've seen in this small sliver of this universe, was like 100% correct about people not giving a shit anymore and just having turned into assholes, because even if these two elves can actually find any evidence of people believing in Christmas or caring, it already appears that such a small percentage of the population would not or should not convince Santa and win him over. So the two elves decide to go over to a local schoolyard, and there is no way that could possibly be a problematic plan that these like normal, like middle-aged looking elves, even though they're short, are walking to a schoolyard. Whatever, it's the 70s. But as they approach the schoolyard, they determine that Vixen is getting sick because I guess Vixen is not used to the weather, and they have somehow determined that this reindeer has a fever. Don't really know how they did that. And it's honestly like, hey guys, maybe it has something to do with her being an adolescent reindeer, hauling two elves all over Hell's Half Acre, and maybe just succumbing to exhaustion. Maybe these symptoms that she's presenting are just a result of that. The two elves approach some kids in the schoolyard who are playing after they leave Vixen somewhere in the shade, basically. And before they can ask any real questions, the kids point out that they look like a couple of Christmas elves. Imagine that. And they point out that this is exceptionally insane for them to look like elves because, beyond the usual, I should say, because Christmas has been canceled and everyone knows that. The elves point out that these kids seem to be legitimately stoked about this development, which doesn't track with any child's behavior I've ever encountered. And they're basically just like, yeah, who gives a shit about fucking Santa Claus? Yeah, kids don't care about getting presents and shit like that. And they're basically just like, going off about this fucking thing, and the two elves look at each other and remark about how the Christmas spirit issues are much worse than they expected. The kids explain that the elves seem to have bigger problems than fucking Christmas because the dog catcher has just put Vixen in the back of his truck. So naturally the elves go chasing after the dog catcher truck, and it cuts to the main kid that they were talking to, and he's arriving home. Mrs. Claus's narration reveals that this kid is going to be a bigger help to the elves than he would have ever expected. And suddenly, as the kid is walking into his house with his dog, Santa just pops out from behind a tree, and this kid has legitimately no sense of stranger danger as Santa asks him if he can talk to him for a minute. The kid introduces himself as Ignatius Thistlewhite, which is quite frankly the most insane name for any person in any era or locale. Doesn't matter, never a normal name. But he says he goes by Iggy, which is natural because no one would go by Ignatius if they had a choice in the matter. When Iggy asks Santa what his name is, Santa hesitates and stammers for a very suspicious period of time before saying his name is Claus. But because this kid is young, I guess he isn't very perceptive and doesn't realize that this is questionable behavior to not know your own name immediately when someone asks you. So the kid just continues the conversation. He asks Santa what he can do to help, and Santa describes the two elves and asks Iggy if he's seen them, and Iggy clarifies that he must mean the two weirdo fucks that were hanging around their schoolyard and talking to the kids. Suddenly, Santa sneezes very aggressively into Iggy's face without even really making any effort to cover his nose or mouth or anything. Iggy's mother hears the sneeze from inside and asks Iggy if it was him sneezing, and Iggy clarifies to her that it was just, in fact, this strange, overweight geriatric man with a large white beard that he has been talking to for some reason. So, of course, Iggy's mother invites the two of them to come inside to talk so that she can give Mr. Claus something for his cold. And I want to point out something right now because, as I've mentioned over the years, I am a chronically single person, and I was shocked to find out that men are considered such notorious babies by the female populace in regard to how they respond to sickness. I guess a lot of guys just surrender to it immediately and seize the opportunity to maybe just have their significant others take care of them, wait on them hand and foot, whatever. But because at least 99% of my life has been outside of a romantic relationship, and even from an early age, I never responded to sickness the way a lot of people tend to, where they just kind of let it consume them and they end up laying in bed for days at a time and call into work and all sorts of stuff like that. Like, that's never been something I do with the more minor illnesses. Like, if I gotta go to the hospital, I gotta go to the hospital, but it is what it is. Now, maybe I'm lucky and I don't get as sick as some people do, or maybe it just doesn't affect me like it does some people, but I just wanted to point out that because it was a very shocking revelation to me when I saw how a lot of women, especially like stand-up comedians and social media personalities, had this perception of men as being babies about their sickness. And it seems to me that in this scenario, Santa is really just using it as an excuse to take time off work, when in reality, he should probably just be sucking it up and not being a broke dick. So as Iggy's mother begins preparing something for Santa, whatever the hell it is, Iggy's father walks in and sits down at the table with them. Santa sneezes aggressively after a lot of hesitation and then begins grilling the young Iggy about what the elves were asking him in the schoolyard. He says the elves asked him and his friends about whether or not they care about Christmas or Santa, and the dad chimes in and wants to know what Iggy and his friends said in response to this. Iggy asserts that he doesn't really care about that stuff and it's just for babies as far as he knows, but he does seem like he's not really sure of himself as he says it. Santa internally says things are far worse than he thought. Like, his internal thoughts, you can hear him say it. And Iggy asks his dad if he believes in Santa, and his dad says that he does, actually. And Santa also says that he believes in Santa, of course, because, like I say, you always gotta believe in yourself, you know? But the terrifying strumming of a guitar begins, and you just know another awful song is coming, post-haste from Santa. And in my vague recollection of this movie, I've only seen it once or twice before, I was correct in assuming it was a bad song. The song is called I Believe in Santa Claus, and Santa likens his belief in himself to love. And then the dad chimes in to sing about how he also believes, but there was also a time where he thought he might have been where he had gotten too old for it. But it turned out he was wrong, because one Christmas night, a man with a beard that we are to assume was Santa Claus came and stood by the dad's bed when he was still a child, which makes total sense because Santa is notorious for having a ton of extra time to go wandering around houses, into bedrooms while he's delivering presents. He doesn't have that much going on that night, guys. Basically, I guess he just sought out this childhood version of the dad in bed because he knew that this kid had stopped believing or thought he was too old or whatever and wanted to lecture him about it a bit or something. Then the song just spirals out of control as the entire message is basically just believe in Santa Claus. But it doesn't really posit any reasoning or explanation. And honestly, there is nothing you should ever believe in more than something somebody tells you to believe in without any logic or reason. So once the song finally comes to a close, Iggy accepts that resistance is futile and that he might as well believe in it for the fuck of it, or that scary man might visit him too. Santa immediately shifts back to his original objective with this conversation by asking if the elves mentioned where they were going after they left the schoolyard, and Iggy says, "Oh yeah, I almost forgot. They were chasing after the dog catcher because the dog catcher had abducted their dog." Santa quickly ascertains that this must have been Vixen, and he really panics about it because elves are probably pretty expendable, but there are only so many magic flying reindeer to go around. So of course, he wants to rush off and see if he can break Vixen out of the pound. Mrs. Claus's narration indicates that ordinarily Santa is a little more secretive about flying his reindeer in front of people, but he figured he might as well just say fuck it this time and do it in front of this family of 3 that he just met moments ago. Then Santa flies off on Dasher's back, and Iggy remarks as he watches about what an unbelievable sight it is, and he even deduces that perhaps the name Claus was a clever ruse playing on the name Claus, and that man who could not have looked more like Santa might have actually been Santa himself. And it's like, gosh, Iggy, did you put that all together by yourself? Iggy figures out that the two men from the schoolyard must have actually been elves and that their dog was really a reindeer. And the dad and mom seem to agree with all of these assumptions. And the dad gets worried that the pound won't know how to take care of Vixen, but I'm sure their usual euthanasia drugs would probably do the trick on any animal of similar size to a dog, so no worries there. I'm just kidding, of course. No shelters put animals down, guys. The pet population is very small, and it's very easy to pay to provide homes and food to animals in perpetuity. No worries whatsoever. So, for some reason, Iggy's dad believes the best course of action is to tell his adolescent son to go see the mayor on his own to straighten out the confusion with Vixen, because I'm sure that's the only good route to take for a solution to this problem. And it turns out that when the elves got to the pound, the dog catcher also suggested that that's what they should do, since he was not going to let Vixen out if they couldn't pay the fine. So it's like he just tells him to fucking go to the mayor. And I guess this really speaks to how much people must have trusted politicians in the early to mid 1970s, because luckily, in this era, especially in America, society was completely free of scandal and no major politicians had been known to have done anything unethical or wrong ever, especially not recent to this movie's release. It cuts almost instantly to Iggy and the two elves in the mayor's office, and the mayor is openly laughing at their story and the outlandish claims that they're making. But it's very weird because the elves explained that they're there on a mission because Santa Claus is taking a holiday instead of doing his whole present delivery trip this year. And it seems as though this mayor has not even heard of this at all, even though it seems like it's common knowledge among the other people in this town. And you would hope that maybe a mayor would be more privy to that, but who knows. The mayor asserts that the three of them don't have a snowball's chance in Southtown of making him believe that even a tenth of their story is true. The elves ask Iggy how unlikely a snowball would be in Southtown, and Iggy says that it never snows in Southtown, and the mayor adds that it hasn't snowed there in over 100 years. The mayor declares that, as a matter of fact, if the elves can use their supposed magic to give Southtown a white Christmas, that he'll release Vixen. And as the elves and Iggy run off to try and accomplish this mission, the mayor laughs hysterically at their motivation, basically. Then he launches into yet another dog shit song about how it'll snow in Southtown, and he basically dances through the streets of this town singing along with all these other citizens very lightheartedly. It cuts to Santa, who has arrived at the pound and has paid the fine to just get Vixen out of there. He removes the socks from her ears and antlers to reveal to the dog catcher that she is a reindeer, and explains to the dog catcher that this is why she is so sick seeming. It's because Vixen belongs in the Great North and she is not used to the warm weather. The dog catcher explains to Santa that the two elves were in there about an hour before him, but they couldn't afford to pay the fine, so they went to see the mayor. Santa decides that Vixen is in too bad of shape for him to put off taking her back home, so he decides to fly her back to the North Pole, first with Dasher before, dealing with the elves situation. Even though it does kind of seem like he could just let Dasher fly on his own to take Vixen back, but I digress. As Iggy and the two elves sit on a park bench together and debate about what to do, because they think that Vixen is still stuck in the pound, Jingle gets the idea to call Mrs. Claus to see if she has any ideas about how to bring snow to Southtown, because her last idea worked out so fucking well. And I'm willing to bet that it might have something to do with those Miser brothers, but I could be way off. It's usually a pretty good idea in storytelling to needlessly introduce irrelevant elements that never come back ever. So it cuts to the three of them, and they're waiting outside Iggy's house, and suddenly Mrs. Claus arrives, being pulled by the reindeer Blitzen on a sleigh, and she has the three of them hop in the back, and she declares that they are going to see Snow Miser. Big shock. And I have to break down and admit that Snow Miser has the only legitimately decent song in this entire movie, and I know a startling amount of the words to it, despite having only seen this a few times, because of its inclusion in the movie Batman and Robin from 1997, where Mr. Freeze, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, forces his goons to sing along with this song while it plays on TV. The song is actually fairly decently written, and I like the instrumentation. It's like basically brass instruments and piano, and it's much better than the other more generic choices that we've heard thus far. Snow Miser sits down and greets Mrs. Claus and asks her how Santa is doing, and she says that he has a bad cold, and the Snow Miser jokes that Santa should have come and seen him first because he would have given him a good cold. Haha. And then Iggy flies off the fucking handle at this slight at Santa and puts Snow Miser in his place and basically tells him to keep Santa's name out of his fucking mouth. Despite Iggy having said like 15 minutes ago that he didn't give two shits about Santa, he's like this enthusiastic. And this is something I will refer to as the Luke Skywalker paradox, where a character shifts belief systems very suddenly and enthusiastically and acts like it's something that they've always felt despite that not being a reality. Kind of like how Luke meets Obi-Wan Kenobi in the first Star Wars movie, and within seemingly like 5 minutes of learning about the Force, he is suddenly very critical of Han Solo for not also believing in the Force. Anywho, Snow Miser explains that he actually loves Santa because Santa is very good advertising for the winter weather that he's all about. So he finally asks Mrs. Claus what he can do for her, and she asks him to make it snow in Southtown, USA, but Snow Miser stops her and says he can't do that because his stepbrother, Heat Miser, won't allow for it and will simply turn the snow into rain or fog because of how far south it is and how hot it is. So Mrs. Claus gets him to accept that if Heat Miser agrees to allow it, that he will make it snow in Southtown. So naturally, her and the boys are heading off to see Heat Miser now. As they arrive to see him, Heat Miser is already doing his introductory song, which frankly is just a rewritten version of Snow Miser's with hot themes instead of cold, and it's slowed down a bit, but it's the exact same music, it seems. He asks where her husband is and asks if he's off doing more free advertising for his brother, very dickishly, and it seems like there's a lot of pent-up resentment between these two misers. Mrs. Claus assures him that Santa is not paid by Snow Miser and that it's just a coincidence that he happens to perpetuate joyful feelings about cold weather, and I do understand why Heat Miser doesn't totally buy this. Heat Miser asks her why Santa doesn't wear a bathing suit and ride around in a sand buggy, and Mrs. Claus is like, because we live at the fucking North Pole, you stupid asshole. Then she breaks down and asks if he'll do a favor for her, and he says he doesn't really see why he should, but he wants to know what the favor is all the same. And Mrs. Claus asks him if he'll allow it to snow in the southern United States for just one day. But of course, Heat Miser is not on board with this idea and immediately declines, but he reluctantly suggests that there is a way he might be able to get on board with this idea. He suggests that if they can get Snow Miser to turn over the North Pole to his control, that he will go along with it. So he gives Mrs. Claus a phone to call Snow Miser on, and apparently it's like a Skype call because we get video footage of Snow Miser answering, and of course he and his brother bicker with each other a little bit, but eventually Mrs. Claus is able to get out that Snow Miser can make it snow in Southtown if he surrenders the North Pole. But of course, Snow Miser has no interest in agreeing to that because that's a pretty raw deal for him, because the way they frame the deal is that Snow Miser only gets one day for his thing, but Heat Miser seemingly gets to take over the North Pole forever. Then Mrs. Claus tells him that it's out of their hands now and that she's going over their heads, and it's heavily insinuated that Mrs. Claus intends to go to see the two Miser brothers' mother, but the elves are very apprehensive about actually following through with this idea of Mrs. Claus's. Of course, their mother is Mother Nature, and it seems like everyone's very fearful about disturbing her, and even Mrs. Claus says that she's never actually met Mother Nature before. And in what is the biggest letdown ever, Mother Nature is this very pleasant woman and is very lighthearted and doesn't really give them any shit for coming to see her. And Mrs. Claus even politely tries to downplay what assholes Mother Nature's sons were being. But Mother Nature, of course, just knows that her kids are dicks at heart and would totally have done something mean. So she summons the two of them, and they just appear, and she explains to each of them that the compromise will be that it can snow for a day in Southtown, and it can be spring for a day in the North Pole, and she makes it very clear that Santa needs an example of Christmas spirit, so it's just basically very important that they all help out with this mission to demonstrate that they're willing to compromise. Despite their initial unwillingness to budge on their terms, Mother Nature brings the hammer down and tells them that they're gonna fucking do what she tells them to do, and that's that. It cuts to Santa Claus returning home and putting Vixen in a literal human bed and reading the note that Mrs. Claus left about going to meet the two elves. And Santa takes great comfort knowing that Mrs. Claus can handle the situation, and he proceeds to go to bed in a rocking chair. Again, a reindeer is in his bed. While a literal animal sleeps in his bed instead of a fucking stable, it begins snowing in Southtown, and all of the kids are there rejoicing. Inside City Hall, the mayor receives a call about how he should wear his galoshes when he goes out, and the mayor very cartoonishly reacts with shock because he hadn't looked outside yet to see that it was actually snowing, and he can't really believe it. And then it shows Mrs. Claus and the elves showing Santa all of the sensational newspaper headlines about the wacky weather when they get back to the North Pole. And Santa finally relents and admits that they have proven their point and that there is some goodwill in the hearts of men of the world, even though I feel like what has happened in this story has proven virtually nothing about what it was supposed to. Like, we haven't actually seen anything that substantial. But the newspapers declare that Santa Claus has received his due vacation and everyone wants to give Santa a Merry Christmas. Mrs. Claus explains that all of the children of the world rushed to spread the good word about Christmas, and finally it seems like one morning Santa Claus is feeling better, and he goes outside, and through sheer coincidence, a bird delivers him a letter. Apparently a child wrote to Santa to tell him that she will have a blue Christmas without him, and this little girl sings this tone-deaf version of the song Blue Christmas that was most popularly covered by singer Elvis Presley in 1957, but the song was actually written by Billy Hayes and J.W. Johnson and was originally recorded by Doy Odell in 1948. Elvis Presley did not write any songs that I'm aware of. As a matter of fact, I believe he was quoted as saying that he couldn't even fathom actually writing a song. He always had to have, he just didn't have that kind of mind about him. So this little girl character's version of the song is sung by her while we see illustrated versions of her drawings, and they're like these sad Christmas pictures that are done with a crayon. And of course, this is very emotional for Santa to see all of these sad pictures, and he wanders inside and sits in his chair, and Mrs. Claus and the elves come to visit him with gifts. Santa reveals, of course, that he has reconsidered his decision to sit out Christmas, and not only that, but he kind of acts like there is no issue, and almost like there never was an issue. Gaslight much? Which is good because it was basically invented as propaganda by that doctor in the beginning, and Santa just bought into it like a fucking weak-minded fool. So the movie closes out with Santa riding his sleigh and coming into Southtown while we get some shitty Kids Bop version of the song Here Comes Santa Claus. Everyone in town is overjoyed to see Santa, and they really can't believe it. And just when you're thinking, God, I'm sure this movie has to be fucking over by now, and it's only 51 minutes long, of course we have to circle back and hear Mrs. Claus narrate about how great everyone says Christmas was that year. Then it cuts yet again to an alternate version of the opening title song that has been reworked to clarify that there actually never was a year without a Santa Claus, and that Santa Claus would, it basically, how does it say? It's like basically it says that Santa Claus would never skip Christmas, even though he clearly intended to do so because of his own insecurities and selfishness this one time. Santa instructs Mrs. Claus to load up his sleigh because I guess that's her job now for some reason. It seems like he would have some guys for that. But he merely rides off in his sleigh to deliver presents, and we roll credits. Alright, so on to trivia. The painting hanging in Santa Claus's bedroom is the same one that is put up in the town hall at the end of Santa Claus is Comin to Town from 1970, Connective Tissue, motherfucker. During the Snow Right Here in Dixie song, a Charlie Chaplin figurine appears as a Southtown resident. Did not notice that. The appearances of Snow Miser and Heat Miser were based on those of their voice actors Dick Shawn and George S. Irving. This is actually a pretty common thing in animated features, but it was pretty slim pickings in the trivia section, so I included that tidbit. This is the second Rankin Bass Christmas special where Mickey Rooney voiced Santa Claus, the first being Santa Claus is Coming to Town, which devotees will recall I covered in tandem with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer in season 1. Jessica / Mrs. Claus has red hair in Santa Claus is Coming to Town, while the much older Mrs. Claus in this film has red highlights, but this Mrs. Claus is never called Jessica, so that's kind of pointless. Alright, because trivia was so limited for this movie on IMDb and Wikipedia, I found a video by a YouTube page called Weird Hollywood Movie Facts 2002 that listed 20 interesting facts about this film. I'll only list a handful of them because, honestly, in my humble opinion, the facts kind of went off the rails into silly territory before the halfway point, but check it out if you want to get more details on this stuff. The Miser brothers were not part of the original story in any capacity and were added by Rankin Bass to tack on a little toughness to what they thought to be a pretty soft story. The two characters ended up being some of the more popular parts of the special among viewers. I mean, honestly, one of the top 50 live-action Batman movies, Batman and Robin, included it, so you know that you've had a cultural impact. There was a scene that was eventually completely removed before the special premiered that featured Santa Claus being arrested by Southtown police. The producers felt that the scene proved too grim for young viewers, but someone in the comments on YouTube did point out that Santa was totally arrested in the 1970 special, Santa Claus is Coming to Town, that was made by the exact same people, and it doesn't really make sense that him being arrested alone would have been considered such a fucking problem, and I tend to agree. I don't really know what that's about. I'm wondering if maybe they got a little rough with him or something. The way Santa's character was originally written for the special painted him as a much more depressed and exhausted person than what was ultimately put to screen. ABC thought it would be too bleak for viewers to see Santa in that light, and what are these weird, is everybody just a bunch of fucking pussies? I don't understand this. When Dick Shawn originally began recording his voice for Snow Miser, he was forced to revise his portrayal because he was being a little too seductive in his inflections and sounded more like a smooth lounge singer. But the more this video explained about how this happened, the less of a thing it seemed to me like it actually was. It almost seemed like that wasn't done seriously and that he just led off with that as almost a joke. It's estimated that nearly 70% of the stop motion animation in this movie was outsourced to Tokyo, Japan, where it was handled by a studio called MOM Productions, or MOM Productions. The Japanese animators explained that they didn't actually know fully what the lines meant that were being said from the voice recordings, and most of them were only given an idea of tone and mood to go on for the facial expressions and such in the scenes, which really explains a lot. Southtown, USA is supposedly based on the real town of Oxford, Mississippi in the United States. Jangle Bells, so these are IMDb nuggets. I should probably explain that. They are IMDb nuggets, so stupid things that I found in the IMDb trivia that was voted very unhelpful or stupid. So, Jangle Bells and Snow Miser resemble one another. Jingle Bells and Heat Miser also resemble one another. That's true, but it's not really trivia. Sometimes people look similar. That's not really exciting. Dick Shawn's name appears written in the snow, and George S. Irving's name appears on the sun, foreshadowing both their respective roles as Snow Miser and Heat Miser. Wow. Yeah, it's almost like that was deliberate and intentional and not meant to be subtle, but I'm glad that you pointed that out like it was some sneaky Easter egg. So there was one that just said, released the same year as Happy Days, 1974. I legitimately could not find any connection between the special and the TV show Happy Days, so I found this tidbit very perplexing. It's like I expected somebody that was involved in making this was a part of Happy Days. Nope, It doesn't seem that way. I mean, I may be way off base. Let me know in the comments or something if you know of some connection, but I don't have any idea who gives a shit about just Happy Days premiering the same year. All right, on to info and ratings. IMDb rating 7.7. Letterboxd rating 3.7. Rotten Tomato Critics score 90%. Rotten Tomato Audience score 83%. Personal rating 3 out of 5 stars. Praise for this movie. Sometimes I do enjoy watching mediocre movies like this. I find it fun. I do like the character designs of some of the unique / original characters in this movie. They're actually pretty decent and inventive, especially the Miser brothers. Criticism, I would say roughly 90% of the original songs in this movie are genuinely terrible and unlistenable. And I also didn't love the perplexing and poorly done claymation work, especially with the lips not matching the words being said particularly well. So that was a little annoying. All right, everyone. Thank you for stopping by. I do appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day. Bye now.
I'm here to welcome you to Brandon and Random Reviews. No method when I choose. It's Brandon and Random Reviews. What you hoped you would see. He's half blind with hats tied, with all the dates of